Coolies. Every year, Pawpaw, my grandmother, prepares a special feast of tofu, mushrooms, vegetables, and winter melon soup in honor of the Qingming festival. On this occasion, we crouch on our knees and kowtow with the burning incense in our hands before we eat. "Why are we bowing to a bowl of oranges?" I asked one year. Pawpaw laughs. "We're not bowing to the fruits. This is how we show respect and honor our ancestors." "Our ancestors?" I say. "Yes, your ancestors," she says. "Let me tell you of two we do not forget. Of my Bok-Kong, my great-grandfather, and his brother. A long, long time ago in China, in the mid-1800s, there was a rebellion against the government by the people, our poor country. Thousands died of hunger because the crops weren't planted or harvested. Thousands could not find work. Your great-great-great-grandfather, Shek, was among them. News of laborers needed in America quickly spread throughout the village of Canton. Desperate for work, the family decided that Shek and his brother Wong should go to this new land. They would have to leave their little brothers and mother behind in China. "Ma, don't worry," Shek reassured her as he packed. "I will send money home, and our family will starve no more, and I will take care of little Wong. I promise." The two brothers bowed goodbye to their family and boarded the overcrowded ship with hundreds of others frantic for work. The motion of the ship made many seasick, especially little Wong. Eventually, he got used to the movement of the ocean waves, but their sea voyage was agonizing and long. To help pass time, Shek and Wong would fish by tying pieces of rags to their hooks and tossing the line over the ship's railing. During the still cold nights, Shek made sure his little brother had enough hot tea and blankets to stay warm. After almost 2 months on the stormy seas, they finally arrived in San Francisco. Like many others on board, Shek and Wong were frail from their exhausting trip. However, the brothers were excited. "Look, little Wong, this is the land of opportunity," Shek exclaimed. He stared out at the new world. Horses and wagons met them at the ship. Shek made sure he was close to his little brother as the Chinese were separated into groups heading for Sacramento. "Stay close," Shek whispered. Please take a moment to look at all the aspects of the picture. Chinese laborers had been hired by the Central Pacific Railroad Company to build railroad tracks headed east. Irish railroad workers had been hired by the Union Pacific Railroad Company, and starting from Omaha, Nebraska, they headed west. When the two railroad companies met in Utah, passengers and cargo would be able to cross the continent in days instead of months. The bosses hired by Central Pacific did not believe the Chinese could endure the building of the railroad. On average, they were skinny and looked upon as mere weaklings. The bosses made fun of their straw hats, pajama-like clothes, and even their long queues, braids which they wore down the center of their backs. Coolies, they called the Chinese, lowly workers. The Chinese laborers began each day at dawn and continued until dusk. Side by side, Shek and Wong worked with heavy sledgehammers that they slammed into the spikes till their blistered hands bled. The cart, full of tools and supplies, would trail up and down the rail line as the workers hammered under the beaming hot sun. Day by day by day, they labored through desert hills, through meadows, and across steep cliffs until they were met by rows of mountains, which the foreman called the Sierras. The loud whistle sounded each evening, a signal to the end of a hard work day. When the Chinese laborers returned to their camps, the cooks prepared hot water in tubs so the exhausted workers could bathe. The brothers also looked forward to mealtime, when the cooks prepared their favorite Cantonese dishes: rice with dried fish, mushrooms, bamboo shoots, vegetables, pork, seaweed, salted cuttlefish, noodles, and, of course, hot tea. Many nights, Shek shared his own food with his little brother. "Make sure you finish every grain of rice for Ma," he would say. The brothers slept in a tent so fragile the harsh wind nearly blew it away, but inside the tent each night, Shek cupped little Wang's hand and helped his brother practice his Chinese calligraphy. Once a month they wrote to their mother and sent money across the sea to her. "Ma," they wrote, "we hope you are able to buy some crops with this money. Please do not worry about us. Even in this foreign land, someday our family will be rich forever. Your sons, Shek and Wang." One hot afternoon, the brothers were still working to cross the Sierras when the boss pulled little Wang aside. "You, Coolie, we have to blow up this side of the mountain to build a tunnel for the tracks. You're the smallest. Get into the basket to set the dynamite." With the little English he knew, Shek shouted, "He too young. I am small too. I set dynamite." He was afraid his little brother would lose his fingers or toes in the explosion. The boss nodded. Lowered in the handmade basket, Shek balanced himself against the harsh wind. He made sure the wick on the dynamite was long enough so the workers had plenty of time to pull him up away from the blast. Using a handpick, he dug a small opening and placed the dynamite carefully into the hole. After Shek lighted the wick, he shouted, "Fadi! Hurry up!" Wang and the workers quickly pulled him away from the blast. On the ground, Shek sighed in relief. Take a moment to look at the picture. Notice down the scaffolding, the bottom of the page, where you see workers working up and down the top of the scaffolding. As seasons passed, the Chinese laborers carried twice their expected workloads at astonishing speeds. At the end of exhausting work days, Shek and Wang were always glad to get back to their tent. One time, as they headed to their camp on the nearly leveled earth, Shek turned to admire a trestle they had just finished. "Someday our family will see our great accomplishment," he said to his little brother. The Chinese worked in 12-hour shifts. They pecked, drilled, and hacked through more and more mountains and hard rock face. Conditions grew dangerously worse. Then the Chinese workers discovered that other non-Chinese laborers were paid more than they. Were they discriminated against because of their long queues and almond-shaped eyes? The Chinese laborers thought so. They spoke little English and felt helpless. Then one June day, some 3,000 graders, tunnelmen, and road pavers joined forces and stopped working. They chanted over and over in English, "Equal pay, equal hours." The bosses were furious. "We're not going to tolerate this. No water and no food until you return to work. If you don't cooperate, we'll send you all back to China." The cooks sneaked barrels of hot tea for the protesters to survive during the cold nights, but with the lack of food and water in days, many of them grew weak. Many of them wondered if the protest should continue. Finally, one night, the workers gathered. Many spoke, then Shek stood up. "We will all starve if we continue to strike. We must not forget why we came here." Nobody answered. Then one by one the workers nodded. They thought of their suffering families back home and agreed to return to work the next day. The very next night Shek wrote to assure their mother, "Ma, please don't worry. Please do not worry. We have plenty to eat here in this land of opportunity. Our family will never go hungry again, and soon we will have a feast together. Shek." Look at the bitter winter conditions the Chinese workers are enduring in the visual. The United States government pushed the railroad companies to complete the railroad project faster and faster. The two companies were paid by the number of miles. The bosses, in turn, demanded and pushed their workers to perform faster and faster. Over the winter, the laborers raised trellis, shoveled the fields, and built mile after mile of snow sheds until they finally came down to the foothills in Nevada. There, a snowstorm raged across the countryside. With fear of an avalanche, one had swept away a crew of workers a year earlier. The laborers shoveled relentlessly through the blanket of snow. As usual, Shek made sure his little brother was by his side. Then, in the late afternoon, while the storm still raged, a roaring, crashing sound rolled down on them. "Avalanche!" Panicked, Wong peered through the windy snow. "Shek, where are you?" he shouted. There was no sign of his older brother anywhere. Wong shouted in Chinese at the other workers, "My brother is buried in the snow. Please, please, help find him. He'll freeze to death." The boss ran up from the rear and grabbed Wong's arm. "Back to work, you coolie. Enough. Back to work." Wong pulled himself free and began to dig frantically through the snow with his bare hands. He remembered his older brother's words that would never be apart. They would never be apart. Finally, Wong saw the tip of Shek's boot protruding above the ap of snow. "Come on," he shouted. "Help." He had found him. The workers helped to dig Shek out of the snow. They found him half frozen and clinging to his shovel, but alive. Wong took off his brown smock and wrapped it around his older brother's frost-bitten body. A cook ran to him with a cup of hot tea as the workers carried Shek over to a bamboo mat in a nearby tent. In his arms, Wong cradled Shek and massaged his older brother's shivering body until it began to feel warm. "Young Cha," Wong said, "drink tea, my brother." "I will get better," Shek muttered back. "I must." As the days passed, Shek became better and better. Though he lost 2 toes from frostbite, he was soon back at his brother's side, back at his sledgehammer, hammering the rails across the deserts and mountains and prairies of the western expanse. 4 years later, it was spring 1869. The Chinese laborers made their way to Promontory Summit, Utah. The 2 railway lines, Union Pacific and Central Pacific, built by the Irish workers from the east and mostly Chinese workers from the west, would meet there. When they met, there was a big celebration. Railroad managers, townspeople, and other workers were invited, but not the Chinese, not the Coolies. Wong and Shek stood back and watched the ceremony from behind the crowd of reporters and cameras. "We know," Shek said to Wong. "Call us what you will. It is our hands that helped build the railroad." Take a moment to view the visual. It should